1919. A young Army officer is driving across the country, looks outside the window and sees the landscape going by and laments the poor conditions of American roads. The officer would carry that memory throughout his 30-year career, and when he was in a position to do something about it, he did. That officer's name was Dwight D. Eisenhower, and his creation, the U.S. Interstate Highway System.
Man has been desirous of roads since the beginning of time. It was the way to food, it was the way to trade. Roads were simple trails at first, and then they widened as man's means widened. The first major road in the United States was aptly named the National Road. The National Road began in Cumberland, Maryland, and pushed its way to the Ohio River. The plan was to open up the West. As this movement of goods came east and west, the road kept moving westward. And it was hard to tell whether the road was pulling America along with it, or whether Americans dying to go out west were pushing the road in front of them. After World War I, America stood as one of the great victors, and the unexpected hero was the truck. Europe was engaged in a bloody battle in trenches, but the truck allowed the Allies to get out of the trenches and mobilize and flank the German army. And these trucks acted as ambulances, they acted as supply vehicles, and they made these forces nimble and quick. In 1919, the United States, having been victorious in the war in Europe, came back, and people wanted to see these vehicles. The United States Army decided, let's stage a military act. Let's act as if an Asiatic force had landed on the West Coast and they needed to be confronted. And let's see if we can move military forces from the East Coast to the West Coast. What they found out, though, was that they were ill prepared. The vehicles could make their way, but the road system was so decrepit, unbelievably, tragically unequipped to handle any kind of traffic. It took them 2 full months to fight their way across America. Along that convoy was a young, 28 years of age, Lieutenant Colonel Dwight Eisenhower. As he watched, he made notes about the poor condition of America's roads. Eisenhower, as a West Point graduate, understood the need for roads. He was being versed in epic battles from the beginning of the Roman Empire right through the Civil War. Eisenhower knew that to win a conflict meant to administrate your army well. Eisenhower had trained his entire professional life to become the supreme Allied commander of the U.S. forces. Ike launched the largest amphibious assault ever, the moment they landed on Normandy beaches. After having slogged his way through Europe on muddy, simple country roads, crossed the Rhine and landed on the Autobahn. This concrete superhighway of 4 lanes was a dream. And his machines, his tanks, his guns, his jeeps moved so quickly along this road, they were able to storm into Berlin in record time. Eisenhower said, after seeing the Autobahn, I knew we needed broader ribbons across the land. In 1952, he decided he would make a run for the president. Becoming president, one of the first things he did was to campaign for this road system he'd been arguing for years. This was one of his epic political struggles. It was Eisenhower's idea to bring it to the states and say to the states, this is democracy, you decide. In July of 1954, Eisenhower was called away to a family crisis. He had planned to address the entire Governors Association. He sent instead his vice president, Richard Nixon, and he said, tell them that this is worse than a bloody war, all this carnage on our highways. It has to stop. Our commercial activity is suffering. We are weaker as a nation as a result of our inefficient highways. Nixon said to the governors, you need to come to terms with what this highway should look like, and you need to start building it immediately. Here are the states. Any one state could have opted out. But these states come together in a coordinated fashion and work together to build a magnificent system. Eisenhower finally prevailed. A very underwhelming, unrecorded event. Eisenhower signs the 1956 Highway Act, probably the most physically altering act of the federal government ever. The interstate system, the largest engineering and construction project in the history of the world, didn't happen overnight. Between 1956 and 1966, it's called the Interstate Decade. 10 years of magnificent road building. But the simple miles were built first. Those miles of highway in the middle of a cornfield or in the middle of America were built very quickly and very efficiently. But as America moved from the 1950s, the 1960s, and into the 1970s, the interstate system was only about half finished. It would take a half century for the entire interstate system, as Eisenhower originally envisioned it, to be finally completed. The impact of the interstate highway system cannot be overstated. It modernized America like nothing else ever had. The interstate highway system brought health care and better paying jobs to the South. It allowed commerce to move factory goods and services along the highway system faster than it had ever been done before. It also became a very powerful military tool that to this day is still used when we deploy from forts to ports. This became the mode of transportation of choice of Americans all across the United States. The Highway Act of 1956 stands as probably the greatest model of democracy ever. It is a volunteer arrangement between states, among states, with its federal government, and it worked. Remarkably, in a time of gridlock, then and now, it has become iconic for how we are able to move any initiative forward.